All right, types of encryption. We're going to focus in on symmetric and asymmetric. Symmetric uses a single key. Basically, it's an older methodology that we use all the time that can have very complex keys. And we talk about using advanced encryption standard, AES. This is common. When they say AES 256, we're talking about the key length, right? The 256-bit key length. When we talk about DES, the older methodology, data encryption standard, obviously it became before the advanced one, right? The point here is it went up to 56 bits, and so it's easier for the bad guys to guess that key because it's shorter, and we'll talk about what that means. An asymmetric model is one in which there are two keys, and those keys are linked in some way, shape, or form, depending on which model, so that you can share information without sharing the absolute key to all information. So one side has a key and the other side has a key, and those keys are linked so that one side can use one of the keys to encrypt, the other uses the other key to unencrypt, and vice versa. So you can swap that message back and forth. It's really interesting because it helps reduce the risk. It is also much more complex, right? So we have to do a lot more math on every single little bit of information. So it used to be a bit more of a challenge. Go ahead.
So a good example of public-private key in action is when you go to a website that's encrypted with HTTPS, which actually technically uses both forms of encryption here, but focusing on the asymmetric point here, that website host will have a certificate, and that certificate allows you to authenticate that is who they say they are because they have something called a digital signature inside it. But they also have this public information in the certificate, which they share with you. And one of those points is that public key. So now you have that public key, and that's publicly available to everyone. They can grab that. You grab that, and then you use that to encrypt the data you send to them. And because they hold the private key, they can then decrypt it. So that's one of the functions of asymmetric here. And most modern day encryption uses both because symmetric is so much faster. They tend to use asymmetric to establish this connection because it's a lot easier to share this public side of the conversation. And then symmetric is fast. So once they have established that initial encryption piece, they use it to then share safely the symmetric key so that they can do things much faster on that level.
Yeah, it's a really good point and speaks to the methodologies, right? So we don't have to use one or the other. It is a combination and always, right? Because how do you get the key if you're not if you're not doing it asymmetrically and you don't have the data, right? So it's really interesting, and the first part of the asymmetric communication will allow you to then establish the symmetric piece, right? So it's really interesting, and it's part of the story, if you will, and it really. Now, when you're doing these maths, when you're understanding how you implement the keys, et cetera, well, if you imagine somebody were able to, in one way or another, affect part of that process or capture some of those keys, it makes it much less secure. And the concern here is you've got something that you've considered secure, but really isn't. That's when we talk about some badness. And we'll get into there as well.
And just a quick follow on to that, a lot of the times we tend to think about these scenarios in a very human way, individual identities and authentications, like let's say logging into our banking sites that we do on a regular basis. But this very same process is extended to devices and non-human or machine-based entities as well too. And so just as you pointed out, if somebody man in the middle or captures some of these this key exchange information, you have a very dangerous form of security, a false sense of security, and the inability to interrogate or validate authenticity of who's on the other side of that communication channel. And so there's definitely some areas of exposure and attack, and there are definitely some ways to mitigate that. But keep an open mind when we talk about these cryptographic processes as to how they're utilized across both human and non-human endpoints and devices.
That's a great point, Phil. Thank you.